Welcome and thanks for joining me tonight. Our topics on podcast tips with Rob Greenlee are going to be about ways to create an audio and video podcast using a cool tool and easy to use tool like a StreamYard. So I've got a terrific guest, and this is episode 23 of the show, and we definitely want your questions and your comments. So feel free to fill up the kind of comment area of any of the platforms that you're watching this program on, and it always creates kind of a really engaging kind of back and forth experience as we pull away from the topic sometimes of the program to answer your questions. But it would be ideal if the questions that you come in could be maybe in context to kind of the line of discussions that we have on the show. But I've got a special guest with us. Mo Akif, who is the content strategist at StreamYard and is the co-host of the Inside the Creator Studio podcast, which is a new official podcast put out by the StreamYard team. And it's also co-hosted by Katie Kane. Mo's going to share, as well as myself, our experiences of doing a podcast and using StreamYard to do that, since we're both doing that. So his insights should really be helpful, and we're going to get into the weeds a little bit on this kind of stuff. Mo is really focused on the content side at StreamYard, and I think we're lucky to have him here. So let's go ahead and bring Mo up on the. Oh, and I wanted to mention too that I am going to do a StreamYard giveaway tonight. So feel free to enter #TheYard into your comment field, and that will pop up in my giveaway tool that StreamYard has at StreamYard.com/giveaway. And if you're a StreamYard user, you can actually use that tool as well to do some giveaways on your live stream. So it's a really cool tool, and I really enjoy doing it. So like I said, keep the comments coming in, and we will do our best to get to those. The giveaway will be towards the end of the program. So let's go ahead and bring Mo up onto the stage here and see if we can get him engaged here in the program. Let's see here. Mo, welcome to the show. Oh, are you not up here yet? Yeah.
There we go.
Hey, Mo. How are you?
Hey, Rob. Hello, everyone. I'm doing well. Look at that. The balloons.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's like an Apple thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a Mac OS thing, and it just like knows when you're doing certain signals. So if I put up like a thumbs up, it'll do an emoji, and you saw the balloons. That's for the peace sign. I love it.
Yeah, that's terrific. But I really wanted to have you on because I know you're really specializing in kind of the content side at StreamYard, and I'm involved in that too. So we're kind of jointly working at this from kind of two ends of the spectrum to some degree, where you're doing pre-recorded content through StreamYard for your podcast, and I'm doing live for my podcast too, and I'm doing an audio and video podcast. So I wanted to kind of dig into that a little bit on the technical side, but I also wanted to share a little bit about your podcast that you're doing for StreamYard. It's the Creator Studio show, and let me pull this up on the stage here so people can see that. So if you haven't seen this podcast, it's actually also as an audio show as well in Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So you can check this out too. But Mo, you've been doing quite a few terrific episodes here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the program?
Thanks so much. Yeah. So it's basically an origin story podcast about the world's best video content creators. And we have a lot of fun in these episodes. We ask them about how they got started, but we also, depending on their strength, will ask them specific tactics for whatever channel they're succeeding on. And that's because StreamYard is not just about one specific medium. It can be used for a wide variety of stuff, whether it be short form content, long form audio only podcasts. It could be video podcasts, live streams, and a bunch of other stuff. Just like you mentioned, your podcast is slightly different from ours, and both have strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting contrast, and one of the big things that I really wanted to focus on, and I think, this is the screenshot of the podcast in Apple Podcasts. So, and then I've got this show up in all the same platforms as well. So I think those are the only two, I think, official podcasts that are in Apple Podcasts. Is that true? or do you know of any others that are trying to do this too? That are being made by StreamYard.
Yeah, these are the only two so far.
Those are the only two. Awesome. So let's kind of dive in, Mo, into kind of a little bit of the technical side of podcasting. Let me drop this screen share up here, but and talk a little bit about kind of your process as you begun or started down this path. I mean, you obviously use StreamYard to create the content, and we'll dive into that part of it too. But I wanted to just cover a little bit of the RSS side, right? So when you worked with, trying to come up with the distribution on the RSS side to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a whole myriad of, I think there's like 120 other podcast listening apps out there, and kind of help our viewers here kind of understand that ecosystem to some degree. And I can help with that too. Since I worked for a few podcast hosting companies for many years, like a Libsyn or a Podbean or a Spreaker and stuff. And I'll pull up on the screen here a few of those too. But what was kind of, Mo, your kind of initial impression of working with kind of a podcast hosting platform for distribution of your audio show? I mean, what was your gut instinct? I mean, there are SaaS models. Were they easy to use, that kind of stuff, or was it a hill to climb?
I was familiar with the process from an earlier podcast that I hosted in a previous life of mine, but back then we used Acast, which I think they may have rebranded at this point, but it was a SaaS model. And now we're using Spotify for Podcasters for this podcast. And honestly, we just picked it because it was free, and we felt that Spotify was a big enough company that we could trust them to be around for a while, which actually doesn't matter that much because an RSS feed is decentralized, and so you can bring it to any service you want at any point. But we did like the fact that with Spotify for Podcasters, you could also just upload the video, and then the video would be available on Spotify. And because our podcast is video, we wanted to be able to do that. But yeah, you could just log in and then distribute to all the other services that you mentioned, including, Google Podcasts, which unfortunately just died, but also Castbox and all the other fun ones.
Yeah, there's just a boatload of them, and recently a bunch of new ones that have come out that are supporting the Podcasting 2.0 initiative too. There's a lot of them, like Fountain and is probably the biggest one of that group that are advancing kind of new experiences for podcast listening apps. And I think increasingly we're seeing more integration opportunities that are going to happen with video too. So I think that's the big trend line that I've been really advocating for in the industry. There's a little bit of resistance to that to some degree, because a lot of people think that podcasting is primarily an audio only medium. But actuality, I could spend the next hour just talking about how that's kind of incorrect. Because when podcasting started, there was almost equal audio and video. There's a lot of people that are surprised by that, but then YouTube siphoned off a lot of that stuff in the earlier days, and so now we see YouTube coming back into the fray again. So I wanted to share next kind of just a screenshot of what a typical podcast hosting platform looks like. And now this isn't Spotify for podcasters. Now, I do agree with you, Mo, that what's unique about Spotify is that you can publish audio and video. You can publish the audio out as a podcast to other listening platforms, but the video stays in the Spotify viewing platform only. So it's an exclusive on the video side. So there's no RSS that's created for the Spotify video side. So just to be clear on that, I mean, I've wanted to support the Spotify video side, and I will probably do that with this show as well. But you have to create your own Spotify for Podcasters account and create your whole podcast over there, but just only upload the video side. Is that what your experience was too, Mo?
Yeah, exactly. We're uploading the video, and Spotify just happens to extract the audio and then publish it to the other platforms that we did through Spotify for Podcasters.
So they actually extract the audio from the video that you upload make both, right?
Exactly. And that just felt a little more convenient to me. So
Yeah.
that's the main reason we went with them.
Yeah, I guess it depends on if you want to edit the audio side of it differently than the video
Right.
side. That's
a
the thing.
great point. Yeah.
And there's also other platforms like a Spreaker, like I have up on the screen here. Spreaker is actually owned by iHeartRadio. I used to work for Spreaker for about 4 years, so I know their platform very, very well. But it's pretty straightforward if you look at the interface. I mean, before you create a podcast, you kind of have to have some basic things covered, right? So like the title of the podcast, what's the name of the show, and then identify what the language is and also what the category of content is. It may be difficult to see on the screen, but there's a whole bunch of categories that Apple primarily has specified to get this podcast into their catalog and get it properly categorized. So you go through here and you select, and then you upload an image, which is like a podcast cover art. It's a square cover art. It's the same kind of thing that we showed on Apple Podcasts when I brought up on the screen. So it's either a 1400 by 1400 image or a 3000 by 3000 pixel image. And typically all these images can't be any larger than 512 KB in file size for them to work properly in the Apple ecosystem. And then your description of your show, and if you want to have it private or public, or limited access, which you can also do in the Spreaker platform as well. But it's pretty straightforward to get a show set up, and I just wanted to share that really quick. I can also share what it looks like on the Libsyn side too, actually publishing an episode. So it's pretty straightforward over here as well on the Libsyn side. So you can upload your media file. That big box up here at the top is basically you just drag and drop your MP3 file, and it uploads directly to the server, and then you just fill out the episode title and then the description of the episode, whether or not it's a clean feed, if it's a full episode or a trailer or a bonus show, and then fill out if there's any seasons, and your episode number here off to the right is what's advised. You put in your author tag, and then you can also upload some episode art as well. And I'm seeing in the industry an increasing amount of people that are actually uploading episode art. And Libsyn has a deal with Canva, so you can just click this button here, and it'll pull up your Canva account, and you can actually create that cover art for your episode, which is different than your series art, and customize it, and it will automatically populate in the field for Libsyn in your show. And then you just really just come down here and you hit publish, and that's pretty much the flow of the process. So I mean, there's certainly a lot more involved in doing this, but that's kind of a high level run through. So let me pull that down and bring Mo back up again.
That was awesome. Living up to the name of your show, Podcast Tips with Rob Greenlee.
Well, that's always what I try and do. I mean, what's interesting about it, Mo, is that I've tried to walk this line because of this convergence that's going on, right, between video and audio. And I know I face some flack from like the creator of podcasting, Mr. Adam Curry. He gives me a hard time sometimes because I'm out there advocating for video and podcasting, and he's not a big fan of video. But that's kind of where this industry is kind of at right now. We're in a transition, and YouTube coming into the fray like they have has really kind of mixed up things a little bit. And then all these big social platforms have also mixed it up a little bit by gathering so much attention, right? And so many views, and have, like a Mr. Beast is a classic example of what's happening. I mean, it's the breakdown of major media as we transition over to more independent media and online media is what we're seeing happen right now. So podcasting is right in the middle of all that stuff. But, and the key thing too, Mo, is, and I'm sure you feel this way too, is that there's no definite one way to prepare a show, right? I mean, it's like a blank canvas. You can do what you want to do. Right.
Totally agree. A lot of entertainment podcasts are improvised, obviously, and a lot of even educational podcasts can be like that. A lot of them just focus on the people, whereas with something like this, I love that you're screen sharing to show and take advantage of the visuals and the visual aspect of a video podcast. So, yeah, there's so many different formats, and they're prepared to varying degrees and in various ways.
Yeah, and I think that there is some loss, I guess, between the video and the audio when I do it like this, because people that are listening to this can't see what I'm sharing, and that is the trade-off. You know, when I tried to explain what I was showing up on the screen, and I think that's the key thing to keep in mind is that you need to describe things that are being presented to them, but visual imaging communicates so much. You know, I know, you know, you guys are very, very focused with your podcast about, you know, kind of motion graphics and video, and trying to make it really, probably, I would say, a little bit more of a video experience than an audio experience, though it can be repurposed that. But what was your philosophy around deciding what to emphasize?
Yeah, basically, we wanted to create a video first experience because we knew that in terms of distribution, our biggest audience, existing audience, was on YouTube. And we also looked at podcasts that we were inspired by, and a lot of them were doing video really well. It also plays to our strengths because we were originally known as a live streaming company.
Right.
And so the video aspect was important for us to showcase, especially because if we want people that use us for live streaming who want to then go into podcasting and who are already comfortable on camera and who want to take advantage of this skill that they have, then it makes sense to go and do video. But also, the biggest opportunity we saw was that if we could package the show and create it in a way that would actually perform well on YouTube, then we can gain access to a whole audience that didn't know us before. I mean, as you know, Rob, it's super hard to grow an audience just through an RSS feed. Most people will already have an audience beforehand, whether that be through email or social or YouTube or something like that. And then they move those people over to the RSS just audio podcast. But for us, we wanted to be able to take advantage of the YouTube algorithm and create content that would resonate specifically on that platform. And so we wanted to create like a really highly produced video podcast that takes advantage of all of the visual elements. And we can show the audience a clip or a trailer from the episode we did with you, Rob, just to show them and not just tell them what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Go ahead and activate it, Mo.
All right. Audience members, get ready for 1 minute and 10 seconds of Rob Greenlee on our show, Inside the
Well,
Creator
and you
Studio,
too.
and me. What is one thing you wish you knew when you started podcasting?
Actually, how to podcast, because I started back in.
I like that you said that you're watching video podcasts as if it was TV.
The word podcast has survived, and it's increasingly meaning more than what it originally had intended.
So anti-hustle culture. You're saying like pod fading is okay.
It is okay, right? I was a content creator on that Sync and Go platform. There's only 13 content creators on the platform.
This is the huge glass of orange juice, and this is Rob Greenlee.
World's largest glass of orange juice plus giving away a sailboat. That feels like Mr. Beast content, except it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's awesome. Here, let me pull you up again here too. I guess we defaulted to me, but let me put you up there on the stage too. But yeah, the whole thing of I think the fun thing about that clip is that I talked about a early podcasting platform called Sync and Go, which was actually run by Microsoft. And a lot of people don't realize that Microsoft had a podcast platform before anybody else did in the space. This was back in like 2003, 2002 timeframe. And I was part of that. So it was only 13 content creators. But I think it's an interesting kind of, there were a lot of precursors to podcasting too. Not to make this whole show about the history of podcasting, but that was a little bit of an interesting thing that was part of that clip. But let's talk a little bit about kind of how you see video podcasting today. I know we've touched on it a little bit so far. It's very controversial in the podcast industry right now, this term video podcast, right? And what it means. A lot of people really resist that because it's like they don't want it to be associated necessarily with YouTube. And that's what's an interesting contrast to what you just shared about your priorities of your show, is that it's taking advantage of the whole visual experience. And a video podcast has typically been just an MP4 file distributed just like the MP3 file is in an RSS feed. And that's what this show is doing, the Podcast Tip Show. I have a video podcast feed as well. So you can watch the video of this show in Apple Podcasts, which most people don't know about, that even exists. And I've been trying to reach out to the Apple team to ask them the question is, why is video podcasting buried in their experience? Because it's not easy to find a video podcast in their experience in the past. So when I go back like 5 or 6 or 7 years, they used to have a little tab that you could tab back and forth between audio and video, and it would pull up all the podcasts that were video and all the podcasts that were video that you can tab back and forth. And that's the same thing that was on the Zune. I used to work on the Zune podcast platform for Microsoft, and I had a tab at the top of the app for that as well, that a person could select which one they wanted, right? But now Apple has depreciated that. And so now we've seen kind of a decline in how many video podcasts are. I would say there's probably maybe 13% of the Apple catalog is video podcasts right now, where it used to be probably closer to 40. So as you think about Spotify and we think about what Apple's doing, I'm going to be pressuring Apple to say, well, what's holding you back on the video side? Is it just, it's the chicken or the egg thing, right? If you de-emphasize it, there's going to be fewer people doing it. But if you emphasize it, then there's going to be more people doing it. So I can see that as a real kind of opportunity for podcasting going forward, because I can see what Spotify is doing, and I can also see what Apple's doing around direct upload to their platform. So maybe we might see Apple do something with a direct video upload to their platform. That would be a different experience. I don't know what you think about all that, Mo, on your thinking about the ecosystem of media distribution, but it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, that's a complicated one. I would love to get the audience's perspective on this, as well as like consumers. Do you guys listen to just audio only podcasts? Do some of you listen to video? I can personally share that I didn't really watch video podcasts until the pandemic, because before then I was always on the go, whether that be public transport or walking. And so I would do audio only. But during the pandemic, sometimes we couldn't really leave our house. And then I just like fell in love with these personalities on YouTube that had podcasts. And
Right.
I was like, well, and once that relationship was built, I was like, now I always tune in while I'm eating dinner or whatever, and I just put them on in the background. That's one point. And then another one is that more and more YouTube TV is becoming a big thing. People are watching YouTube on their TVs. And that's, I think you might have mentioned this during our... Yeah, there you go. Me too. And you mentioned this, I think, during our interview. It's a lot of people are listening to podcasts or watching podcasts on TV in the background. And that's a very different experience. And so like that's another aspect of how video podcasts are evolving, because usually what you used to watch on TV was like news shows and stuff like that, which similar to podcasts, but they were a lot shorter form. But now people like to just watch these as movies or just have it on as like background noise.
Yeah, and it does seem like that the the video side of podcasting, the content is extending longer. It's this. There's also been a tension in the podcasting space for many years between short and long form content, right? There's always a certain section of people out there that believes in short form content. And so when I say short form content in podcasting, it's like 15 minutes or less, right? Some shows will be 5 minutes, but there hasn't been a lot of value or perceived value in short podcasts. And because if you look at the top 200 list of the most popular podcasts in the world, they're typically around 45 to 50 minutes. I mean, and some of them, you look at like a Joe Rogan and he'll do a 3-hour episode. So that's the biggest podcast in the world, right? And so there's evidence. And even if you look at Twitter X, I mean, they started out as 140 characters and where are we at now? I think we're at like 5,000 or 10,000 words or something like that you can publish into Twitter X now. So content is getting longer, but you also have to think about engagement too. I know YouTube looks at length of views as an important metric. I don't know. Did you consider the duration of your show on that spectrum? Well,
yeah, absolutely. We didn't want to go 3 hours because it felt intimidating. Like as a viewer, I think I look forward to like consuming long podcasts if that creator's already built up trust with me. So I trust Joe Rogan, I trust Lex Friedman, Andrew Huberman, Tim Ferriss. These guys can go super long and they will have my attention. But when you're starting out and you haven't quite earned your audience's trust yet, I would definitely recommend going shorter because it's a big commitment. One thing I can share in terms of analytics for our podcast that we kind of learned the hard way is that the first 20 minutes are really important for engagement or retention in YouTube analytics. We noticed that if it takes us too long to get to the promise that we made in the title and thumbnail, then people begin to drop off. So there was one episode we did, for example, where it took us maybe 17 minutes before we got to what we promised them in the trailer. And that episode had half the retention that other episodes, like the one we did with you, for example, where only with you, like 11% were still hanging out after 20 minutes. But this other episode I just mentioned, there's only about 6% left. And so that has, like, one thing we're thinking more and more about is about how to get to the point quicker so that they do stay engaged and that what we promise them is something that we actually deliver on.
Yeah, I do feel that tension too. I think we talked a little bit before the show about countdown clocks and how those can be. I mean, I think you can go in and edit those out of the YouTube video, but I don't know that you want to keep those in there as you try and pick up viewers on your on-demand side, because that's time that people are just wasting watching a clock tick down. And they may get bored of that and say, well, I'm going to drop out and go click on something else that I can get right into the content, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And like we do that, for example, with our Sunday Ask StreamYard show. They always do a timer, and we've considered cutting it out, like the timer in post. But the issue with that is that then you don't get the live replay of the chat, which is like also something that you might want for audience members who want to feel like they didn't miss out on all of the insights in the comments. So there's a trade-off. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that there's also this aspect of it too, where this gets back to the tools a little bit too, timing when you start streaming with the playback of, let's say, an intro or a video or something like that. It's just trying to get it timed right, because sometimes it takes a little bit of time to connect to the streaming. Now, if you're live, it's a different factor than I think if you're doing it as a recorded show. So I think you do have to consider that, and that's how I use it. So if you saw the very beginning of this show, you saw me use a countdown clock, and that was basically a 15-second countdown. But I actually started that countdown before I clicked to live stream it. So by the time people actually saw that countdown clock, it was probably down to like 4 seconds. So that's kind of how I use it too. And at some point, I know that Gage has said that you'll have this ability to play a video that corresponds with the start of the live stream. And so hopefully that'll happen at some point. But it's an interesting kind of thing you have to do from a tooling perspective to get a production, or you just start, and this may be a better way of doing it. Just start right in, as soon as it connects to the live stream, just start doing the show, start, teasing your topics and get right into it. I know some, YouTube shows that I watch, their podcast, you click play, it starts playing, and the host is already talking about their topic, right at the, there's nothing in between, right? But I also know that those shows are typically probably pre-recorded. So
yeah.
that's
Yeah,
a-
exactly. And so one thing we do is we have like a trailer right at the beginning so that people can decide like, okay, is there something in this podcast that I might want to tune in for? And it gives the viewers the option of basically saying, okay, they cover like they're going to cover something that I'm interested in, so I'm going to watch this. I'm in for the long haul. Or they can opt out and say, I like what you guys are doing, but this topic is not exactly a fit for me, so I'm gonna bounce.
Right. Yeah, I think people make quick decisions. I'm the same way. When I watch a YouTube video, I think that countdown clock can kind of, delay your decision, right? If you're going to continue, that would be my feeling about it at this point. So when I take the video version of this show and I do some editing to it, I usually cut out in post production before I publish it as an on demand video podcast. I will cut out that countdown clock and I'll put my own little kind of like tile for the image of the podcast right at the beginning. But that only shows for like a couple seconds, and then it gets right into the show. So it actually kind of sets up who's in the show a little bit, kind of gives the audience a little bit more information before the actual show starts. But it cuts out that whole countdown clock. So that's one advantage of doing it that way. And then also one thing that you can take advantage of that typically, and to some degree, I'm probably not taking advantage of as much, as the local recordings. So why don't you talk about that? I know you're exporting the local recordings, and you're doing a multi-track editing process, right? Is what I understand is what you're doing.
Yeah, so we record in StreamYard with the audio and video local recordings enabled, and then afterward, our video editor Grant will go and download those files, put them into Premiere Pro, and he will use a tool called autopod.fm, which is AI based, and it's really good at creating multicam edits of podcasts. And so what it will do is, using AI, it will recognize whose voice it is at any given point and display them on screen. And so that's why if you do end up watching our podcast, you'll see that we're always switching between people's cameras, and sometimes there's a multicam shot if we're speaking over each other or something like that, or we want to capture the group's reaction to something that just happened. But the local recordings, the main strength is that you get to modify each track individually, which gives you a lot more flexibility for power users who really want to make their audio or their video awesome. But also the quality is just significantly better for most people, because cloud recordings are dependent on your internet connection and also your guest's internet connection. And so oftentimes tools that rely entirely on cloud recordings, such as Zoom, for example, you'll see that it can be grainy, that it can be visually noisy, and they often apply a lot of processing to the audio itself. So not only are you getting lower quality video, you're getting lower quality audio. And so local recordings is the solution to that if you want more control and higher quality in post. Now, one common issue that people bring up with local recordings is that it's more work. And to that, I say, like, yes, it is. This is more for people who want that extra control, but also there's some cool stuff coming to StreamYard that will solve this problem for you. That's all I can say about that for now.
Yeah, I know you guys have been rolling out a lot of kind of AI tools, the shorts, clips, and things like that, and being able to create your own thumbnails too. I thought that was a really cool tool to add as well. That, if we can make, and this is a big thing that's happening in the podcasting industry too, is that there's a lot of AI tools out there that can help with the pre-production and post-production side of content creation. Now, obviously, the recording part of it, AI typically doesn't have much of a role in, but it's the wrappers around that process is where it's really kind of streamlining. And I think we're going to see that really grow and develop into workflows that are a lot easier for podcasters, because that's what the podcast hosting platforms are really focused on, is ease of use. But so is StreamYard. StreamYard is focused on building, ease of use, professional stream. I know that Gage says that every week. And that's basically, I can see that on the tools. It's very focused on creating ease of use, simplicity, but yet professional capabilities. So, and I think it's a delicate line to walk for any kind of SaaS platform. And I think AI is going to increasingly come into StreamYard, and we're going to see a lot of interesting things happen. I think you just alluded to something maybe that was coming.
Absolutely. Yeah. Really excited for that. And, one of the things that people loved talking about at Podcast Movement Evolutions last week when we were there is the AI clips tool, which, for people who don't know, now you can basically take any live stream or podcast that you've recorded with StreamYard, and we will automatically recommend certain clips for you. And you can just hit generate. It'll take a couple minutes, and then you have these clips, these vertical clips ready to go to publish on whatever platform you want to promote your podcast. And the nice thing is that even if you are an audio only podcast, you can still use the video to promote your podcast on places like TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, Facebook Reels, etc.
Yeah, it's also a good tease, because those that would publish the short videos will eventually probably publish their longer form, probably once they catch the bug of it, right? So it'll be interesting to see how that grows and develop. I did notice when I did that for this show from last week, it generated 2 video clips for me. Do you happen to know, does it generate more than 2? It depends on the content, or do you have an idea of how that works?
Yeah, so it will generate up to 5, and right now they're being very strict about what they actually will allow you to see. So, because their bar for quality is extremely high right now, and they're still figuring out the exact specifics. But they're also, the other thing is, they're focused on Q&A for now, and it's going to get more and more broad as they continue to work on it. But right now it's up to 5, and it'll focus on parts of the interview where somebody asks a question and then somebody answers that question in a succinct way. But expect to see more soon.
I would imagine in a fairly short window of time that transition happens, right? So if one person talks for a long time and then the other person talks for a long time, it's hard to get a clip that encapsulates both conversations because of the duration, right? Because you're limited to, what is it, 5 minutes? Is that what it is? Or 2 minutes or 1 minute? I think it's something like that.
Yeah. It's very short. I think it's up to about a minute. And this is based on what we've seen in terms of what creators are asking for, and also clips that are performing well. Because on YouTube Shorts, for example, the limit is 60 seconds. And so we didn't want to suggest clips that were longer than that. And yeah, you're totally right about the fact that the conciseness of the clips is because the person has to ask the question and get an answer within the same, 60-second clip. And that's largely because of what we've seen perform well in terms of like shorts and TikToks and Reels, where it's podcasters posting clips from their show. We need it to be self-contained so that anybody who's just scrolling across their feed will come across this clip and understand exactly what's going on.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to have that. I mean, it's a difficult thing to walk, but over time, I'm sure that there'll be settings that you can set to create different types of experiences based on publishing to certain platforms, I would imagine. But but it's very helpful to see the beginnings of that. Plus, also, one thing I haven't talked about a lot on this program, but I did try and use it with my live show from Podcast Movement last week, was the guest app that is available for people to use. So if you want to bring in a guest into your live show, you can, and they happen to be not at their computer at home or something like that, they can certainly tap into the guest app that's in iOS right now. And so I'm excited about what that potential might be as you look to the future of being a full production studio app as well.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that as well. I'm seeing more and more people who create content from their phone just because it's lower lift. And yeah, really excited for the future of the StreamYard app.
Yeah, and the iPod or the iPad too. So I mean, to be able to do that, and people have been using iPads to create podcasts for years and years and years. So it would be interesting, and it's got a decent camera on it too. So you could see a person using an iPad to do a live show at some point too, I would think. So, which they can probably do today, but I know that the browser on the Apple ecosystem isn't that great. So,
A dedicated app is always a better experience.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you come up with your content strategy as you think about your episodes? And I think you mentioned to me that you guys use kind of like a vision outline type of a document that is shared between you and Katie. And I don't know if you share that with your guests or not, but you certainly could. Right.
Yeah, this was more of just a one-pager strategy document that we came up for us to know exactly what we were aiming for before we did any interview. And so basically what we decided was, we know our audience is content creators and people who are doing marketing with video. Our goal is to educate the audience about video content through storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
But also we want to tap into large creators' audiences and increase that like top of funnel growth for us as StreamYard. Because although we want to, create media that resonates, like, it's also about having people learn about StreamYard and how it can help them like create content.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing we decided early on was that the way we would stand out compared to other podcasts was to deeply research our guests, focus on their origin stories, and also like the stories behind the specific creative choices they made. And we do that by framing questions and prompts to get those sorts of answers. So I can give you a couple examples of this. One is like, set the scene. Tell us about the day you made your first video. Another one would be like, what set of steps led you to choose this specific thumbnail or over others? Or what was your inner monologue like when you got that idea for that specific thing? Those are a couple of things we think about of like why we're creating this podcast and how we're going to be different. But also in terms of cadence, one thing we decided early on was to do it every 2 weeks, which just gives us a little more flexibility for making sure that the production process is handled thoroughly. As you guys saw, it's a highly produced video show, and that requires a lot of feedback back and forth. And so our video editor, Grant, like I said, after he downloads the local recordings, he'll go into Premiere, but after he creates a first draft, he will pop it into a software called frame.io. And we use that to give him feedback because frame.io allows you to provide time-stamped comments on any given video. And so Katie and I will go there and make suggestions on what we like and things that we can change, B-roll that we can add, parts that would be good for the trailer, parts that would be good as shorts. We make all these sorts of comments in frame.io, and that's sort of like the feedback loop between us and our editors to actually do all that stuff. And then the last piece I can share is that in terms of how we grow our audience, the primary way is still YouTube. And so we focus a lot on packaging the title and thumbnail in a way that would appeal to more people. And we obviously still distribute to all the audio platforms that you mentioned earlier, but we also do shorts. So we try to get 2 shorts from each episode minimum, and we will post this on Reels, on Shorts, YouTube Shorts, that is, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, everywhere. And in the description, we always have a tracked link so that we can know how many people are signing up for StreamYard through the podcast. And speaking of that, we didn't want it to be like an overly salesy podcast. We wanted people who love creators and content creation in general to just come hang out, have a good time, learn something. And then if they are so inclined, they can go learn more about StreamYard. But this was a decision we made early on based on the podcasts that we enjoy watching. Because actually, I should ask the audience, if you guys don't mind, what podcasts are your favorite to watch on video, and what sort of category would you put them in? Are they business? Are they entertainment? And like, what sort of feelings do you get, or why do you come back to them over and over again? Because for me, a big part was just seeing the chemistry of the hosts and, them having a good time and it being an entertaining podcast rather than just like pure education and pure sales. So personally, that's what we were going for this podcast. I think that covers it. So we've talked about production, distribution, raising awareness, and the angle of the show.
Yeah, I think you did do a really good job of kind of covering that. And to apply a little bit of a contrast, I think you wanted to share a document, right? That that you had uploaded to the platform.
Yeah.
On that. So go ahead and do that, or I can do it.
Sounds good. I'll do it. And just to set some context for viewers, this is what our cold outreach emails look like. So this is the part that comes before we ever, produce an episode, before we even record the episode. I first have to discover the guests. And so I usually do that because I consume a ton of content in my own time. And I will reach out to people that I'm a fan of and who I feel like would be a good fit for the show. And then I will send them a cold email, and I get their email through their YouTube channel usually, because they usually have business email in their about section. And then you just have to fill out a CAPTCHA form and you'll find the email. And then I send them an email like this, and I'll tell you why it works.
All right.
So this is me sending an email to Latasha James, who is somebody we had on the podcast recently. And the first thing I do right away is make the title clear of like what this is. And so podcast interview invitation from StreamYard, that tells them exactly what that is and whether or not they would be interested in it. And within the first sentence, I ask them what I'm interested in specifically, and I give them links so that they can learn more about me, my co-host, and our company. And then I tell them immediately what the podcast is about. And the third sentence is important because it shows that you're not just a bot or like some sort of, someone that's just cold emailing everybody, and that you're actually tailoring this message to them, that you are specifically trying to reach them. That's where I will tell them how I know them, what I like about them, what we would love to ask them about. And this part's really important to tailor. At the end, the whole section after that, after the third sentence, is basically me telling them how they would benefit. So I'm telling them about the traffic that we get. And I'm reassuring them that our company is legit. I'm telling them where episodes will go up. And I show them a sample episode. At the time that I had reached out to Latasha, we hadn't yet uploaded this episode, but I was still able to give her the frame.io link so that she could go get a feel for the podcast. And that accomplishes two things. One is it gives them a vibe check for your podcast and whether or not they would enjoy being on your show. And the second thing it does is it gives you social proof. So if they see that you've had really awesome guests on your show, and those guests are maybe similar to them or have a similar audience size to them or even bigger, then they're much more inclined to be on your show. So this is working surprisingly well. Yeah, Johnny Bean, Latasha from 10 years ago, she's still going strong. I love her content. Go check out Latasha James on YouTube. And yeah, this cold email strategy works extremely well. I am surprised by how well it works, and I think you guys should totally try it. In an email like this, to invite guests, how would you do it starting out with low numbers? So the first part is basically finding out what your strengths are as a podcast and what the benefit would be for them. So for us, for example, I actually could not sell them on, hey, our podcast is doing these numbers and is getting millions and millions of views, because we didn't even have a podcast. So what I did was sell them on the brand overall. So StreamYard has, a ton of brand awareness. We have a ton of customers. We can reach people on YouTube, on Facebook, right? 100,000 subscribers. Things like this is what I had to emphasize as our strengths. A previous podcast I hosted called Made at McGill was a narrative-driven origin story podcast about entrepreneurs at the business school that I went to. And over there, similarly, we didn't have that many big numbers, and we also didn't have the reach that StreamYard has. So what I did then was used our alumni network to get a couple of really great guests early on who were successful entrepreneurs. And then everybody else that I would interview after that, I would tell them, hey, look, this really cool entrepreneur was on our show. Maybe you'd like to join too. And then that, gives them some social proof and stuff like that. So in your case, what I would do is see if there's somebody that you already have a relationship with in the industry that you want to create a podcast for, invite them on, and then use them to get more guests. And you can do this in two ways. One is just cold email people and tell them that you had this awesome guest on. But the other way is ask that first person or first couple people for references or suggestions on who else you should have on the show. And they might be able to make you a warm introduction. So in summary, play to your strengths, whatever that might be at the time, and use your early guests to get more guests.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach. I mean, I think I've tended to, over the years, with the podcasts that I've done, is just contact people that can give me referrals into other people. So it's basically a referral-based system. Or like for this show, most of the people that I bring on this show, I already have existing relationships with or contacts with. That's why I added that little and friends part, because a lot of the people I've come across over the 20 years I've been involved in the podcasting space, I can just reach out to them and they'll come on in any program that I'm doing. So it's really just a matter of, what your network is and what your relationships is in the industry or the area that you're trying to get started with. And it can be a little hard if you don't have a reputation and network already established in the beginning. Now, granted, trying to get really big guests on your show, ones that are like celebrities or famous people like that, that's hard for anyone, really. I mean, unless you have a comparable size show to either their prominence or whatever, it's hard to expect someone that's like a Joe Rogan to be a guest on your podcast, because he just doesn't have time for that, right? So I think it's really about setting your expectations at the level that you're at, but trying to push that envelope a little bit to get guests that maybe challenge your views or bring something in addition to you. And I think this is one of the things that's interesting about this program, as well as a good example, is that both of us have experience in podcasting and have experience in creating online shows and creating content, but we have a contrast experience base based on our history and the work that we've done. So, trying to get guests on that add to the conversation or add to what you're doing is how I would approach it. So your reputation as the host needs to be the lead of the show, because that's the glue that keeps people coming back, right? So what I hope to build with this show is that people primarily come back to listen to me, and I've got a solid base of community that I've built that are interested in what I have to say. If I bring on a guest, then that basically adds to the experience, not as a replacement for. And I think there's a lot of people that will tell you that, you bring on a guest, and if you're a host, you just need to ask a question and shut up. I don't know what you think about that, Mo, but that's been, like a Larry King type of a kind of an interview type of a situation, right? And there's a lot of people probably don't even know who Larry King is. He's passed away, but I used to work with him years ago, back when I worked at Podcast One.
Seriously? That's awesome. Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah. And Mr. Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew and all those folks. I worked with all those folks too. So it's actually, I just had Dr. Drew out to be the MC of the Podcast Hall of Fame that I just kind of led down in Orlando here this past February. So we inducted another 8 people into the Podcast Hall of Fame. So, and Dr. Drew came out to be my master of ceremonies. So it was great. Yeah.
That is awesome.
But anyway, yeah. So go, yeah. You're going to say something, Mo? Go ahead.
I was just going to say that one of the things that you do really well is go to conferences, meet people in the industry, build real life relationships with people, and then invite them on. And I feel like a lot of people can learn from that model because like people are more willing to forgive a smaller audience size if you really vibe with them and they just want to have a conversation with you. Because like, if you would these people go out for dinner with you, then they would probably come on your podcast too. So I would highly suggest like meeting people in real life in whatever industry you want to create a podcast about, or if it's more of an entertainment thing, then there are conventions for that too. If you really like anime or video games, you can go to a convention for those things, meet people there, and then ask them to come on your show. And the second point I want to make is that big guests on a podcast can sometimes be overrated.
Yeah,
Sometimes the highest performing podcasts can sometimes be people that you haven't heard of. And the key there is to make sure that they still have something interesting to contribute, and also package your episodes in terms of the titles and thumbnails, if you're doing video, in a way where people are interested in the topic itself rather than the actual person that you're interviewing. And you'll see that even if people do come to your podcast with just because of a big guest you had, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to stick around. And so I would probably advise you to think more long-term about building a community who's there for you and for your show, rather than just being on for big guests, which is probably a flash in the pan.
I mean, it can be good to have a big guest on, but it's also, it's the serendipity of finding someone that's very interesting that maybe isn't as well known. I find that experience with the Lex Fridman podcast all the time. I mean, he brings on technologists or people that, that are doing really different things, right? That most people haven't heard of before, or have written a book or something like that. That's very, very interesting. So what you should do is really go out and find people that are really pushing the envelope of whatever that topic is that you're trying to cover. And as at the leading edge of that, they may not be well known yet, but they may be going to be well known at some point in the future. So it's just a matter of, you want to kind of break that news to your audience and be seen as that cutting edge program. I think that's helpful. So let's before we move on to doing anything else here, let's talk a little bit about your philosophy of bringing Katie on the program to be your co-host, and how you guys thought about that. I know I've oftentimes done co-host type programs as well. I've had as many as 3 co-hosts on a show before, but it's an interesting way to create conversation. And this is why I bring on guests, is that it's almost like a co-host type of scenario, but it is a little bit different because I've done I did a 4-year podcast for Spreaker that had a co-host, and it was the same co-host every week. And this other guy had just an extremely bombastic personality. He was like, I mean, he was so volatile, right? If you say something that was a little bit off or whatever, he'd just like go off on me, right? And here I am, like this mild-mannered kind of, somewhat you consider to be rather boring type of a personality, right? I'm calm and collected, but this guy was the opposite of that. Right? So if I said something controversial, he'd be just like rip me a new one. But what it created was this dynamic in the audio that was that created fans that wouldn't necessarily be fans of me, but would be fans of him, right? And they kept coming back because they like that conflict, right? So if you get a co-host, definitely one factor of that too is you guys can't have the same voice, can't sound like the same person. That this person has to have a very distinct voice, and I think that's the key. I don't know what you're feeling because you've done quite a few episodes now with Katie. How do you feel about that dynamic between you two? Now, granted, both of you bring in guests, which is another third voice in there, which is a little bit different. But if you guys were to do just you and Katie, how do you think that dynamic would be?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I hadn't thought about it, but so first of all, like when we were thinking about the podcast, Katie was already interested in podcasting, so that made it really easy. And we had a couple of discussions, and she was, and we like creatively we were on the same page. So I loved working with her. And then I had met her in person a couple months before we had ever recorded the podcast with you, which was our first episode.
Yeah.
And we really vibed. We had good chemistry, and this was, you know, I think we both realized that, oh yeah, we would love to have a podcast together. So that was one thing. And then the other thing is, as a consumer, I love podcasts where there are co-hosts and a consistent set of characters to relate to. And yeah, we still have guests on, but over time, I think people will become more community fans of where like they're tuning back in, not just for our guests, but also for us as co-hosts. And it's just inherently true that two people are more interesting, especially if they complement each other or contrast each other, like what you said with your co-host, than if it were just one person. Some of my favorite podcasts have, you know, multiple co-hosts. I can think of one that's called Friends Per Second. This is a video game podcast. Hey, Puddles, what's going on? Here for the duck.
Here for the duck. Hey, before you move on to something else here, this brings up an interesting question. We saw on April 1st that StreamYard pushed out Splash, right, which was a goose, a white goose, and you guys teased that it was going to be replacing Puddles, but my gut is that Puddles is not being replaced. Is that true?
That is true. It was an April Fool's joke, and it was interesting because even like employees at the company were messaging the marketing team like, "Hey, what's going on here? Did I miss a meeting?"
Right. Yeah,
so we got
totally.
them. The plan worked, except for one fun little blooper I can share is that X or Twitter, when you change your profile picture, it doesn't immediately let you change it back for a while because it wants to make sure that you're not like a bot or you're not like some scammer or something like that.
Yep.
And so it was interesting that the day after April Fool's, we were supposed to go back to our original logo and it wasn't letting us. So the joke was on us. So we had to wait a couple days and it's been fixed now. But yeah, April 2nd, we were like, oh, what's happening right now?
Yeah. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about the whole replacing it again. I know that if you change that little circle image on Twitter X, it'll take away your blue check for a while. So I don't know if I didn't realize that if you uploaded your old image, it would cause more problems.
Yeah, exactly.
So was there any thought about making Splash kind of like a companion mascot to Puddles?
Okay, that's an idea I haven't thought of. I'm going to write that down. Is like, what if Splash was just part of the StreamYard cinematic universe?
Kind of like it's almost like a couple of sorts.
Of sorts.
Puddles and Splash are in a relationship.
Or as podcast co-hosts, to our point earlier.
Right. They could have their own show. We could actually make a podcast with Puddles and Splash.
Oh my God, that's a good skit idea too. So, I'm our content marketing manager, so like all these are like good content ideas. I'm writing them down.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I thought it was really entertaining because I thought that the Splash Goose was a very attractive. I mean, whoever made that did a terrific job and went to a lot of effort to pull that together, right?
Yeah, shout out to our designers.
Yeah, that was terrific. So, let's think about what we might want to talk about too. Other things we want to talk about. So, when you guys came up with the concept for the Creator Studio, did you guys do a bunch of research in YouTube and in the Apple Podcast catalog, looking for shows that had that same concept or that same name or whatever? Also, I mean,
So yeah, I can tell you a little bit about all of our inspirations. So I love listening to Colin and Samir. They have a YouTube video where they cover the creator economy and a bunch of creators. They had this creator support podcast where it was just them two answering questions, and we really
mhm,
like the vibe there. But also on their main channel, Colin and Samir, they interview creators, Mr. Beast and the like. I really love their show, and they do it in real life. And we thought, sort of like, okay, is there a way that we can create a similar high production vibe using a remote podcast? Right? That's one aspect we haven't talked about, is that there are real life podcasts and then there are remote podcasts, and there are strengths and weaknesses to both. What we liked was that, we could get a global um, audience, or, we could reach out to creators from all over the world. The other thing I'll mention is Jay Klaus. He has a really good podcast that is remote, where he does interview creators, and
mhm.
he has managed to pull off the YouTube thing really, really well. He has an audio podcast as well, but his was not video first. His started off as an audio podcast, and then he went to video. Um, I can mention a couple more inspiration podcasts that we looked at. Diary of a CEO. One thing we stole from them was their trailer and their thumbnail approach, which is just really compelling. Their first 60 seconds, you tune in, you're like,
Oh, it's
oh my
awesome.
God, this is beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen other shows start to do that too. I think I saw the was it the Impact Theory
Yeah.
series started to do the same thing. I think they saw what they were doing there with the CEO show and copied it, because I could see that they kind of did that pre-production. So that's the advantage of doing something in a pre-production um, prior to it in a recording of a show versus a live show. It'd be difficult to do that with a live show. So, but that's one advantage, and you can see how it really played into kind of teasing the audience to answer the question. So they would basically tease it by going right up to the point with a very interesting question and then cutting it off just before they answer. So it was a very craftfully done type of lead in, right? That teases the audience. Well, I want to hear what the answer to that question is. But I do think even in a live show, you can do that too. I think you can tease what's coming up, and but it's an interesting approach, right? And I think you can do it with a live show too.
I totally agree. I guess you would just have to use your words a little bit more, and like think about writing an introduction for that guest that
Right.
creates that curiosity gap for people to keep tuning in.
And you have to make sure that you ask that particular question during the early part of the program too, right? That's the thing that goes into the pre-production planning and things like that, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. A couple other podcasts that inspired us was Digital Foundry. This is a podcast that talks about like gaming hardware, and what we loved about them is that they have like this multi-cam layout. So they have a remote podcast, and it'll switch between having all three co-hosts on at once, and sometimes just single shots, like Rob just switched to right now. And by the way, like if you want to produce a show like ours live, you basically would need somebody like Rob is in the studio right now producing it and switching between different layouts. So there are aspects of our podcast that you could create live as long as you have a producer who's switching
Oops.
between cameras. No, that's totally cool. And it just goes to show you like um,
Yeah, I
that
can go full screen with both of us too. Let's see here if
exactly.
I can get it. There, well, it's not going full screen. Okay, here's the full screen here.
There you
Right.
go. Yeah.
Yeah, so we can adjust this. I've got some settings that I created. So the StreamYard platform has the ability to create custom kind of layouts too. So that's kind of what I do with this here. So it's a custom layout is what this is, because then I can show my background. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And then the last two podcasts that I can think of that inspired us are the All In podcast. This is where a group of venture
Jason Calacanis,
capitalists,
right? Yeah.
yep, love their show. And what I love about them is that they have this sort of like motion graphics introduction after their cold open. And
Hmm.
it just sort of sets the scene, sets the vibe. And if you think about watching that on TV, you're like, oh, yeah, it's like a TV show is starting and I'm just going to tune in and hang out. And yeah, those were some of the inspirations. And for our name, Inside the Creator Studio, that was inspired by Inside the Actors Studio, which
Ah, I
was
remember that series. Yeah.
what a great interview show. Yeah.
Yeah, that goes way back in time. I used to watch that. I was a show that was done out of Hollywood, I think, in
Yeah,
LA, about the actors in LA would come on and be guests on that show.
exactly. And
So, yeah.
Katie and I both have sort of acting backgrounds. I studied theater for a year
Oh,
and
you did?
she,
I didn't realize that. Okay.
yeah, and she went to like she completed her acting degree at NYU, and we're both like really enamored by the movie industry. We love actors, we love all things entertainment. So it was that interview show was really inspiring to us.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it too, watching it as well. Haven't really seen too many. I'm surprised. Well, I guess if you look at the interview shows that exist out there today, it's following very similar to that model. Um, you know, there were a lot of other shows that were like that too, that were early into that genre, right? That were very, very successful concepts. Um, but so what, I mean, if you think about what lessons have you learned so far about doing this as a podcast? I mean, or if you want to talk about any tough things that you've had to go through
Oh my God.
in getting episodes out the door.
Yeah, so um there was one lesson we learned in a really positive way, in a way that we felt like we won. And that was with your episode, Rob, which was the first episode we had decided, let's do a premiere for this one and just see how it goes. And we loved it because you promoted it on all of your social channels. And then we had a lot of people just come in to tune in for the premiere. The comments were absolutely filled, lots of positive vibes. And then that gave a signal to YouTube like, hey, this video is performing well, push it out to more people on the algorithm. So to this day, you still have one of the highest performing episodes. And so we decided, let's keep doing premieres. Now, eventually, we wanted to experiment just to see how it goes. We did an episode without doing the premiere, and the performance just sort of tanked compared to other episodes. And we realized that we had created this expectation for our audience that this experience would be social, right? There would be a live chat that they could hang out with us and with other viewers on. And so when we took that away, because we like this was a new behavior for our audience, I think a lot of people like didn't want to do that. And so we're now going back to the Premiere model,
Mhm.
and and it makes sense for us as StreamYard because we do like we have an audience of live streamers and uh people who love the live experience. So now we're finding that win-win where it's a pre-produced show, but it's also being played live so that people who do want to be there while it's airing is
Mhm.
having a good time. Do you remember your experience when you were there in the chat for that first premiere?
I don't remember specifically, but yeah, I think if I go back and I look at it, and I know that that's the big thing about just in general live, is that you've set that expectation that this is going to start playing at this time and on this day. And if you're there every week at that day and that time, And that's what's great about Premieres. And I've used it for other YouTube shows that I've done. Like I have another show called Trust Factor that that has been always published as a Premiere, but it was all pre-recorded, right? So I was able to upload it and then stage it for release, and it actually, for all intents and purposes, it looks like it's live. And I think that's why you have that audience engagement with it, is that there's a perception that it's live, because of how it was set up and all that kind of stuff. You just upload a video, there's no like real setup and staging it for a scheduled release, because that's what it's really all about. But what StreamYard does is you can get in and set that up for your live stream and populate it to all of, LinkedIn, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, all that stuff, and it creates a staged, scheduled event, right? And I think that's the power of that. So it's trying to work out all the details on how you produce that live event and then be able to take it out as a podcast. And I've struggled with a few things, like the episode I did last week live from Podcast Movement. Some of my guests were like, one of my guests was doing it while he was driving his car. So the audio wasn't that great, but it was great to have Gordon Firemark, who's a podcast lawyer who was driving back from Podcast Movement, join me while he was driving his car with his son in the back seat. So it was,
the lawyer was breaking the law while he was driving back. I love it.
Well, he had it mounted like under the dash, so I think he had both hands on the wheel. It's just that it was a little noisy, so I had to mute him all the time. So anyway, so this whole live thing can create a real interactive experience. And I know my other guests that called in were calling in from like happy hour parties or meetups or whatever. So you had a very kind of weird audio experience too. Like I've been buried in trying to normalize it and get it noise reduction and all this stuff on the episode, and it didn't turn out as well as I was hoping it would. But that's, it was real life stuff, right? And that's one thing I don't strive towards. I know I've been helping out a bunch of technology companies here lately with technologies around noise reduction and sound optimization, so people can do this kind of stuff with all sorts of type of recording devices. Like I have the DJI mic set here. I don't know if you're familiar with this one, but it's basically a lavalier set that you can get from the DJI folks that plugs into an iPhone. So you could use this with like the StreamYard guest app on iOS, and this is your microphone, and you just attach it to your lapel and it transmits into your iPhone. So it's a powerful way of doing this as well. But well, Mo, I think we're kind of getting to the end of the line here with the show, and I want to remind everybody that I am going to do a giveaway for a Puddles. So if you want to win a Puddles duck and a mug, then type hashtag the yard into the comment field in your favorite viewing platform, and that'll get you added to the giveaway. So let's looks like a bunch of people jumped in with the hashtag the yard. So thank you so much. I want to have as many people in here as I can. And let's see here. Let me clip through all these. It looks like everybody's getting in here. So let me pull up. Looks like we're up at 51 entries, Mo. So
that's awesome.
Let's share that on the screen here. And I know we're getting towards the bottom of the hour here. And so let's go ahead and pull that. I'll play a little bit of music. I saw one person posted in the comments about playing background music, and I can give you a little bit of testimonial from what happened to me in last week's episode. Is I did accidentally play the background music a little too long in the episode, and some of the viewers didn't like that too much. So I would probably recommend turning it off after maybe a minute or two or a couple minutes. So, but I guess it depends on the kind of show that you're doing too. So let me go ahead and
yeah. But by the way, is there a Q&A section?
Oh, for this show?
Yeah, like with comments. Like, do we ever take comments from audience members? I know there are some starred comments that I can like quickly rattle off and like answer their
Yeah,
questions?
yeah. Let's give away the giveaway, and then
Sounds good.
the last, if we want to go another 10 minutes or so, we can address those questions very specifically at the end of the show.
Sounds good.
So let's plan on doing that.
Good luck,
So,
everyone.
yeah. So let's go ahead and give it away. And let me also mention that if you win, then send me an email. So let me give you my email address, and send me an email with your name and which show that you were listening to and your mailing address, and we'll send you the merch out. So here we go. Good luck. I saw StreamYard in there. Johnny Bean, congratulations. You are the winner of a Puddles Duck. You can
Johnny Bean.
find
If I can get this.
right. There you go. There you go. Puddles Duck and a mug. So send me an email, and I'd be happy to forward that on to the StreamYard team, which is fantastically. Katie actually does that for me, your co-host. So gets those prizes out. So Johnny, send me an email if you happen to still be watching right now. And so let's go ahead and take a few questions. If you have some open there, Mo,
Yeah.
go ahead
So
and pull 'em up.
yeah, I put them all in the start section in the comments. The first one is that an iPhone? That's when I was doing like my emoji thing. So like, for example, if I do this, you'll see balloons. That's
Yeah.
not on an iPhone. This is through Mac. So I've got my webcam plugged into my Mac M1 Pro, and yeah, it's through Mac OS, not iPhone. Now, the second one is you can make a video podcast, an audio podcast, but you can't make an audio only podcast video. At best, it's a still image. I like this comment. I agree with you. Rob, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, I think it is possible through a lot of the podcast hosting platforms to publish a audio podcast into YouTube through their social sharing tools as well. But you can also add an audio podcast to YouTube. And I know that's not exactly what the question is, but to YouTube today, and YouTube will convert that into a video file and then post it to YouTube with a still image. So it's just a matter of what you want to do. I mean, a lot of people in the podcasting space are like, I don't really care about publishing my audio to YouTube. If I'm going to get in YouTube, it's going to be a video. So it's just a matter of kind of your own philosophy of if you want to embrace that or not through either channel, either pathway of the social sharing or directly via your RSS feed. So
yeah, that makes sense. Do they own the video or audio? Can you still upload to YouTube? I think this person was referring to when we were talking about, these podcast distribution platforms like Spotify for podcasters, for example. The answer is they definitely do not own the video or audio. Unless you're Joe Rogan and you made a deal with Spotify, you'll own your own video and you can still upload to YouTube, no problem.
Yeah. I don't think any of the platforms really want to own your content per se, but it is on their platform, and they will do with it what they want because it is on their platform. So it's subject to their rules and their regulations around copyright and content and those kind of things. And so you have to be sensitive to each of these platforms. And I do think that it's coming increasingly to podcasting, to the kind of things that we've been seeing in YouTube around content. So, it's something to keep in mind around, but if you share a podcast, kind of off of your own website and do it independently of these big platforms, you can kind of avoid any issue like that typically. But that's increasingly getting more difficult to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, for this next one, I'm going to rely on you because I have no idea. Is the Spreaker Live feature worth it?
Well, I used to use it all the time with the Spreaker Live show that I did. So it's live audio. It's not live video. So keep that in mind. Not that many people engage with live audio anymore, even though what we've seen on Twitter X with the Spaces area has become fairly popular on that side. But even Spaces supports video now. So it's just a matter of what kind of show you want to do. I mean, live audio is also increasingly coming to podcasting through what's called the Podcasting 2.0 initiative, which is new namespace tags that are being rolled out that will embrace currently embrace live audio. So you can, there's also another tag in there called the lit tag, which will notify the podcast app, these Podcasting 2.0 apps, newer apps. That ping will notify the app that there's a live stream available, and they will pop up a notification saying that your favorited podcast is now live. Click here to listen. So we have those functionalities increasingly starting to come into the podcasting space. And even there's been talk about embedding a YouTube video in your RSS feed. That's the other kind of thing I'm hearing a lot of yet, but if you talk to, which I do, the podcast hosting platforms and the Podcasting 2.0 initiative, which I've been a part of for a couple of years now, that's been one of those options that people are exploring, right? Is how do we get video increasingly into these podcast apps?
Makes sense. One more question about live audio. We have a successful audio podcast that we post to YouTube as audio with still artwork. Is it worth the work to go to live audio with us talking? What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think if you have a successful audio podcast, I think I mentioned an answer to this a little earlier, that it's probably, it's probably okay to try and do something live. I would think increasingly about maybe trying to open the spectrum a little bit and do it live in a platform like a StreamYard or those kind of things, where you can kind of have an opportunity to engage with people through more platforms than just maybe one, and also gives you the option to have video too. So
yeah, exactly. If you use StreamYard to create an audio show, you can use audio avatars that show up, so that you won't have to show your face, but you can still sort of have an image that represents you. Yeah. And like on an off-topic point, I do remember Clubhouse and the rise of live audio, during the pandemic and stuff like that. It seems like that has died off a little bit. It's still around, Twitter Spaces now, like that.
Spaces,
yeah,
right.
Exactly. Yeah. So, until StreamYard gets an integration with Spaces, I would say try going live to YouTube with StreamYard, and try also Spaces, see what works for you and which gets you a bigger audience.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Be able to push a live stream over to Spaces.
Yeah. Rob, what do you think of funky new names like Vodcast?
Oh boy. I think the ship has sailed on this one. So I don't think we want to confuse the landscape, especially with I think there was some survey research that came out just in the last couple of weeks that was saying that the awareness of the term podcast has reached, I think it was 95% of the US population. So, vodcast is, video on demand, but I think increasingly audiences are seeing the term podcast apply to video experiences on YouTube too. So I'm not sure you're accomplishing anything with trying to change the name or adding a new name.
Yeah, exactly. I really like this comment from my views. I like to be able to turn something on and go do something else. Short ones require too much work to watch. 1 hour is good. So, which is interesting because a lot of people will say, the whole attention spans are going down thing. But here you have somebody pointing out the truth, which is that actually people still consume long form content and they like and they prefer it.
Yeah, I have noticed, at least even with this program, is that the longer it goes, the more live viewers there are. So, and it continues to go up. I mean, occasionally, I think it depends on the topics and what you're talking about. I have seen it go down, but this show, if I look at what the numbers are of this show, it's continuing to go up. So, Mo, I think they the audience really likes you.
Well, I'm flattered. I'm flattered.
Right.
I'll quickly answer this question of like, how do I stream from my phone? I will post a comment with the link to our YouTube video that will show you exactly how to do that. And there you go. It has been posted. So the next question, when we're almost done here, do you change your thumbnail photo each show, or do you keep it the same for every show? My opinion for YouTube is change each thumbnail for
show.
each topic or each episode, because they're like, people are going to be tuning in for very different reasons. And so depending on the guest you have on or the topic you're covering, tailor it for that. But this is only for YouTube, in my opinion, because YouTube is a video platform and people decide whether or not they want to tune in based on the thumbnail. And this is not the same for podcasting, where it's a lot more about your title and where people are coming in from. And so the podcast cover art doesn't matter quite as much on YouTube. What do you think?
Well, it's a complicated question because on the podcasting side, it's primarily the series art that usually gets more prominence. But Apple has always had the episode art tag in the RSS feed, right? Where supposedly you could upload a custom episode level art. And for many years, they had that in their namespace tag. And so when I say namespace, it's the tags that are in the RSS feed that is used to distribute the podcast. And Apple didn't even support their episode level art tag. So it's only been in the last year that they've embraced the episode level art tag, and you're starting to see more shows. And if you look at the podcast app, it actually will show the episode level art when you click to play an episode. So that episode level art can be a confirming episode kind of experience as well. So it can share a visual impression. Like, I'm not doing an episode level art for this show. I am doing it my live stream distribution, but I would like to get to a point where the episode art is custom within even the podcast area. And I'm seeing many shows starting to do that, and I think it might be helpful, but it is extra work. There's no question.
Yep.
Hopefully AI can help with that.
Oh, that's a good point. Right. Yeah. Facebook user, you should know that StreamYard is, I believe we've rolled it out. Yeah, we have. So we'll make thumbnails for you. So we'll change it depending on whatever you're covering. So try out that feature when you're setting up, a live show or a pre-recorded show. Just hit, like when you're just picking on the thumbnail, there will be a button there that allows you to make it with StreamYard. Will StreamYard and the Puddles Pond be at NAB in Vegas? So our in-house employees will not be there, but we are sending some partners. Rob, will you be there?
Yeah, I'm actually set to do some presentations at the Creator Live event that's on the exhibition stage. It's actually in the South Hall of the exhibition, National Broadcasters event. It's coming up on April 14th. So if you happen to go to the NAB show, you could stop by and watch my and I may be doing a workshop about StreamYard at the event too. So yeah,
that's awesome.
So it'll be fun. Yeah.
Can a StreamYard with only top-down camera be successful? This is interesting. So I guess what they're saying is, instead of looking at your face, it would be looking down at something you're doing. So one stream that I've seen succeed at doing this is like tech stuff. So where they're like reviewing a product or something, or maybe they're showing you a tutorial. Another one that I've seen work really well is these people that are knitting. And so there's this group of people who will just stream and knit, and instead of showing their faces, they're just doing something with their hands. So I think if you have something visually interesting that you can do top down, you can definitely be successful. What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, it's interesting kind of departure on this concept of a faceless video. That wasn't the typical scenario that I'm used to hearing about of doing it for like trying to demonstrate something, but it totally makes sense, to actually do that. So I think it's okay. I think usually what you see is is people use those above cameras looking down, but yet they also have a face camera as well. So then they can switch back and forth. So if you're trying to like show this kind of thing, I could pull up a camera that would have a top-down view on this thing, and I could model it a little bit, right? So
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
typically how it's done. Yeah.
Legal-minded friends Karen Cole points out, if the thumbnail looks the same, I might think that I watched it already. So this is to an earlier point we were talking about, and I think it's a great point. She also mentioned another great point, which is I need to be able to do stuff, listen and watch if I need to see something. I just made meatballs while listening to you both.
That's awesome. Yeah, Mo, I have another question for you, and then we can kind of wrap up the show. But about logos, right? This show has kind of a logo. It's that Podcast Tips with Rob Greenlee and Friends logo that you see up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. And many YouTubers don't use any kind of a logo, right? All they have is contextual text and a visual image of some sort, or graphics or splash or funny look on their face, like, that kind of stuff going on in their graphics. What's your thought on that? Do you think a show that's trying to straddle this line between being a YouTube video and a podcast kind of needs to have a logo? And do you think it detracts from the YouTube experience?
I think you should make a logo. You don't necessarily have to put it in your thumbnail. For your thumbnail, I would say like create the thumbnail that will get YouTube viewers to actually watch your video. And oftentimes that will be more about like the topic that you're covering or the guest that you're going to have on. But you should still create a nice logo for your audio distribution, because that's how people are going to like that's the book cover of your podcast on those other distribution platforms. And also you can still sort of display your logo during the show, sort of like, your logo is right here on top of me in this visual layout. And it just gives you sort of a recognizable visual branding. So yes, to Mark Fletcher's point here, it's all about branding, and yes, logos sell your voice. What do you think, Rob?
Well, I mean, I definitely agreed with the strategy with this show is to have a logo be there. But I just see so many successful YouTube videos out there that I don't know that I would consider them to be kind of a series. I guess they are really, but I just don't see a lot of big successful YouTubers with logos. And I wonder about that sometimes. But if you're trying to do both, maybe it makes sense. Or if it's really about kind of a branding and color theme, might be how we separate ourselves on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And to the earlier like top down and face thing that you mentioned, where it's like multicam, Rob, Marianne says that she does that. I've checked out some of Marianne's videos. I love them. And if people in the comments are interested in seeing what a good multicam video looks like, definitely go check out Marianne's channel. A specific question for you, Rob, about the audio thing. So Metal Seer points out sometimes your audio gets garbled for a few seconds now and then. Do you know any, like, what might be going on technically?
It could be that occasionally I speak too loud. And it may be maxing out the mixer that I have here. So I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. I definitely would want to address that problem. And I oftentimes struggle with my audio too, but I do have different levels of my voice, and I speak in the microphone if I get too close or if I get too far. But I do have a lot of compressor and normalization running on my Rodecaster here, so it shouldn't be too bad, I wouldn't think, but it probably happens. It's digital, so things sometimes don't always go out the way they should.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So, well, Mo, thank you so much, and I appreciate everybody here that stayed with us for an hour and 39 minutes. So thank you so much, and it's great to have everybody with us, and I would love to have everybody back next week for the the Podcast Tips with Rob Greenlee show. I have a guests that are coming up, so you're not going to want to miss those too. So I always bring on the interesting folks that hopefully can give you a unique perspective on what's happening in the podcasting space and with StreamYard too, trying to meld those two things together. So thanks everybody for being here, and Mo, especially to you too. And I think StreamYard for creating such a terrific tool for content creators and podcasters now. So I think it's awesome. So
Great.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.